LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 15th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here tonight. I've got the 10 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I'm actually doing the show sick tonight, which I guess is kind of appropriate for the coronavirus topic. I don't think I have coronavirus, but I'm going to tell you, instead, there's no political comedy. I don't feel very comedic this week. So instead of political comedy, I'm going to tell you a little story about what's going on with coronavirus here in the Sacramento area in terms of testing, what I found out. I've mentioned in weeks past that my wife is a healthcare worker here in Sacramento. She even works at one of the hospitals where there was a coronavirus death. And she came home Tuesday feeling sick with some symptoms, but not the exact symptoms of coronavirus. And she's someone who works with pregnant women, so should definitely not be contagious with coronavirus, and called in to her healthcare provider. Unless you have traveled to one of the hot spots, at least as of last Tuesday, or you have contact with someone who's tested positive, you cannot get tested for coronavirus here in Northern California, which is one of the epicenters of the spread. And that's really, really bad. You've heard stories, but I saw it myself. And then I've actually gotten sick. One of the reasons I delayed the show is because like 20 minutes ago, I felt like I was going to throw up. That's why I don't think I actually have coronavirus, because it's mostly like a stomach problem and sweating and chills. But anyway, just for you, for my viewers out there, I don't think I've ever done the show this sick in the last 360 weekends that I've been doing this. But I still have my clip list. I'll drop my clip list here if you want to follow along on my 10 clips. These are my notes to myself. And I want to get this live stream all done so we can all go watch what may be the last Democratic candidate debate between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. There was almost no coverage of that on the Sunday morning news analysis shows, that since basically the whole country is grinding to a halt. And if you read my topic description for the coronavirus topic, I say major disruptions in daily life in the United States after President Trump's poor, dishonest handling of the coronavirus crisis makes exponential spread more likely. And I think that is where we are. And I'm going to show you news summaries first from all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets, and then I'm going to show you 5 newsmaker clips. There'll be a couple Dr. Anthony Fauci clips, a couple Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin clips, and a Larry Kudlow clip. And then I'm going to go to bed and get some rest. So let's start with the news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press. Basically, they all have a mix of showing the statistics in the United States, the statistics globally, showing scary graphics about the spread. Of course, Fox News Sunday, the Fox News Channel Sunday news program that I'm going to show at the end, they didn't really as graphically show you the spread of coronavirus, just because I guess they still want to downplay it a little bit. I don't know, but that's the 5th news summary. Here's the first news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd this morning over here.
Good Sunday morning. America's recognition of the coronavirus crisis we now face seems to have grown about at the same pace the virus itself has spread, slowly at first, then exponentially. As of this morning, there were roughly 3,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the U.S., resulting in 60 deaths. But there has been very limited testing, so those numbers may be way off. Gone is the nonsense that this is a hoax. Gone mostly is the disinformation that this is nothing worse than the flu. And gone too is the myth that we're in for mere inconveniences. We're facing one of the most serious health crises in American history. President Trump's declaration of a national emergency on Friday calmed the financial markets, but only after his teleprompter speech on Wednesday prompted Wall Street's worst day in more than 3 decades. In this morning's special edition of Meet the Press, I'll talk to Dr. Anthony Fauci, 2 governors and 2 hospital executives at the front line of this crisis. And of course, we have our political panel. So many questions remain. Why has the U.S. reacted more like overwhelmed Italy than like South Korea, where there appears to have been some containment? Why do health experts seem so much more alarmed than the federal government does? When will we have enough test kits to know how widespread the virus is? Will the healthcare system be able to handle the coming surge in cases? And ultimately, are we doing enough right now to stop the epidemic? We do know this: life in America is changing, at least for the time being. And sadly, things are likely to get worse before they get better.
We're moving into uncharted territory.
Millions of students will now have to stay home.
The financial markets in free fall.
A nation on edge as efforts to contain a global pandemic grind public life to a halt.
Nervous, scared, confused, not really sure what's going on.
Governors in 19 states and Washington, D.C. have closed schools. The National Guard is now active in a growing number of states. Businesses are shuttering. Last night, airports from Chicago to Dallas to New York jammed with Americans trying to come home.
I have just enacted an executive order to activate the National Guard.
A state disaster for all counties in the state of Texas.
We will close all K-12 schools.
On Friday, the president declared a national emergency.
A national emergency. Two very big words. The action I am taking will open up access to up to $50 billion.
And the House passed an emergency relief package. The legislation includes 2 weeks of paid sick leave and up to 3 months of paid family and medical leave for many Americans, as well as food aid, enhanced unemployment benefits, and free testing regardless of insurance coverage.
The three most important parts of this bill are testing, testing, testing.
Still, despite weeks of promises on testing.
On the subject of testing, we've been making steady progress.
The production and shipping of tests that we've talked about all week is completely on schedule.
Anybody that needs a test gets a test.
The Atlantic's COVID tracking project reports that fewer than 25,000 tests have been conducted nationwide. NBC has confirmed about 3,000 reported cases, but testing data is very difficult to collect.
People should not say, if you want a test, go get a test right now.
We have a serious deficiency in being prepared for testing.
Do you take responsibility for that?
Yeah, no, I don't take responsibility at all.
Because of the limits on testing, the actual number of cases is likely much higher.
And even though we've only have 5 confirmed cases, we feel that we could have up to 100,000 people in Ohio right now who are carrying around the coronavirus.
And joining me now is a very familiar face these days in this crisis. It's Dr. Anthony Fauci.
And that's Dr. Anthony Fauci did the full Ginsburg this morning, meaning he went on all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlet news shows. And I'm going to show you a couple Anthony Fauci clips coming up. I thought that was a pretty good news summary. I thought in some ways it was a little too nice to the president for and his administration for how they got us in this mess. The mistakes they've made, the dishonesty. I mean, there was something in there about the testing and showing how even Republicans are saying the testing isn't happening, but they didn't really juxtapose it with the promises that tests were available. And I think this next ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary at the end does a better job of showing some of the administration's misinformation that has gotten us in the terrible situation we're in now. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We want to get right to the latest developments on the coronavirus pandemic. There are now over 156,000 cases confirmed across the globe and more than 5,800 deaths. Spain is now in lockdown. France and Israel are closing restaurants and other non-essential businesses. And here at home, the numbers continue to climb. Take a look at this map from last week. And now there are more than 2,900 known cases in 49 states and Washington, D.C. That's every state except West Virginia. At least 59 deaths have been reported. Our fight against an invisible enemy has turned life in America upside down. Mass gatherings put on hold. Almost 26 million students are out of school. And more of us are working from home. As our nation faces this crisis, our goal each day is to provide you with reliable information, to separate rumor from fact, to understand the true scope of this pandemic and what we should do to protect ourselves, our families, our neighbors. But to be blunt, your ability to make informed decisions is impaired when we hear things like this.
We have contained this, I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. This is a flu. This is like a flu. Anybody that needs a test gets a test. If an American's coming back or anybody's coming back, we're testing. We have a tremendous testing setup where people coming in have to be tested.
Each of those statements were either highly misleading or flatly wrong. And further misinformation in a primetime Oval Office address this week caused more confusion. This is a time we need to be able to trust the information coming from the federal government. And when any inaccurate information impairs our ability to understand what is happening and to do what is needed to halt the spread of this disease. This is not a matter of political spin. This is now a matter of life and death, health and sickness. This morning, we will try to get more clarity. Our first guest joins me now, Dr. Anthony.
And like I said, there will be a couple Anthony Fauci clips coming up, but you saw there that I think ABC did the best job of any of the 5 news summaries of holding the administration to task for their poor handling, their dishonest handling. That's the most, getting false information out when they should be getting reassuring, true information out. And hopefully, President Trump will pay a price for his mishandling of this once it's all over. That's not the most important thing right now as the country goes through a health crisis that none of us have ever seen in our lifetime. And how bad it's going to get, we don't know. But if we're going to judge how bad it's going to get based on how well the administration has handled it so far, that is very bad news, as you saw in that last clip. Next, I'm going to show you CNN State of the Union, much shorter news summary, just about a minute long. And one of the things, I mentioned this before, I started the news summaries, you saw NBC, you saw ABC, and now you'll see CNN and CBS Face the Nation. Not only do they tell you the number, the statistics on deaths and cases, but they show you a kind of scary graphic. Well, I mean, at least like a big map with red on it. And you'll see at the end, Fox News doesn't do that, even though like Fox News' whole their whole modus operandi is scary graphics, and you'll see all of the other 4 have scarier graphics about what's happening with the coronavirus than Fox News, including this CNN State of the Union clip. Brianna Keilar's in for Jake Tapper this week on the State of the Union this week, following Jake Tapper's tradition of saying, what is the State of the Union? It's adjusting to changes in our daily lives, and that's certainly true, as I will discuss with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Brianna Keilar in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is adjusting to the changes in our daily lives. Upwards of 2,800 people have now been diagnosed with coronavirus, and more than 59 have died as the outbreak spreads across the United States, and public health officials warn things will get worse. To combat the spread, schools in almost 24 states are closed. Large public gatherings are widely forbidden, and people are wondering which of their normal activities are safe to continue. In Europe, authorities are sharply limiting public life. France closed all restaurants and cafes, while people in Spain are restricted from even leaving their homes. President Trump has declared a national emergency to combat coronavirus, and this week the Senate will consider a House-passed relief bill that offers paid emergency leave and makes coronavirus tests free for those who can get them. The administration is working to ramp up a severe shortfall of those tests as experts look ahead to what could be the next crisis, whether the U.S. will be able to treat all the people who could become gravely ill. And joining me now is a leader on the president's coronavirus task force, the nation's top.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, who will be coming up in the clip after next. But, no, sorry, 2 more clips, 2 more news summaries. The next news summary is the final of the straight news journalistic news summaries. It's CBS News' Face the Nation. They don't even normally do a news summary, but I guess the news needed so much explication this week that Margaret Brennan does her introduction, and then you'll see at the end she hands it off to 3 different reporters who are reporting on different aspects. And as usual, down in the video description, there's a link to the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel where all of these segments are available for free. If you want to, I'm not going to show you the 3 news reports. I'm just going to show you Margaret Brennan's intro. along the lines of the other ones, just a little bit shorter over here.
First, an update on the virus and its toll. In the U.S., 49 states and the District of Columbia have reported over 3,000 cases of coronavirus. The death toll stands at least at 60. Globally, at least 142 countries have reported over 156,000 cases, with the international death toll now at over 5,800. And there are now travel restrictions on non-Americans coming into the U.S. from 28 European countries, including new restrictions on incoming travel from the U.K. and Ireland that will go into effect Monday night. We begin with 3 reports from around the world. First up, White House correspondent Paula Reed.
So, like I said, if you want to see those 3 news reports from around the world on coronavirus, there's a link down in the video description to the CBS News Face the Nation website. Now, like I said, you saw, I think, all 4 of those last, was it in the CNN State of the Union one? But I think in all 4 of those last 4 news summaries, you saw scary graphics of a big map with red all over it. You don't see that in the Fox News Sunday news summary, which, like I said, is a little odd for a channel that is well known for its scary graphics. And also the #1 news story, you'll see Chris Wallace starts here and he talks about the top stories and the #1 top news item, Trump negative for coronavirus. Like, that's what we were really all worried about. And I will talk about that a little more with you after we watch that 2.5-minute news summary together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The spread of the coronavirus here in the U.S. has dramatically changed the way Americans live. It's shaken the markets and left Washington scrambling to provide care for the sick and ease the financial fallout. Here's the latest. The president's doctor announced Mr. Trump tested negative for the virus after coming into contact with several people who tested positive. The president also expanded the European travel ban to now include the UK and Ireland. In a moment, we'll speak with the government's top expert on infectious disease, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. But first, let's bring in Kristin Fisher, reporting from the White House, with the latest on the effort to stem the outbreak. Kristin.
Chris, life is changing across the country and here at the White House. Just yesterday, journalists were required to have their temperature taken before they were allowed into a briefing with President Trump and other senior administration officials. Even President Trump decided it was time that he should be tested for the coronavirus.
I also took the test last night. Yeah.
The test came back negative, according to a letter released last night from the White House physician. But nearly 3,000 other Americans have tested positive, and that number is only expected to rise as the country's ability to test for the virus accelerates. So far, more than 50 Americans have died, millions of students are out of school, and 39 states, plus the District of Columbia, have declared a state of emergency. President Trump declared a national emergency on Friday, and yesterday he expanded the travel restrictions he placed on most of Europe to include Ireland and the United Kingdom. As Americans racing to get home faced lines that stretched for hours at U.S. airports for enhanced health screenings, the president also confirmed that he was considering implementing domestic travel restrictions.
Specifically from certain areas, yes, we are. And we're working with the states, and we are considering other restrictions, yes.
And on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin hammered out a relief deal which includes free coronavirus testing and 2 weeks of paid sick leave for workers. That bill is now heading to the Senate, and it could be taken up as early as tomorrow. Chris?
Kristin Fisher reporting from the White House. Kristin, thanks. And joining us now...
And again, Dr. Anthony Fauci, like I said, he was on all 5 of the Sunday morning news analysis programs on all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets. And and I will show a clip, not from Fox News. I have an NBC and a CNN clip of Anthony Fauci coming up. But I think you saw they still did report more on the coronavirus than you have heard from Fox News in a lot of programs for the last few weeks about the seriousness. And so at Fox News, even in their prime time, most biased programs have turned a little bit of a corner, as you know, in terms of recognizing the seriousness of the coronavirus crisis. But I think of all the news summaries, they went the easiest on the president and the administration, doing their best to avoid any mention of his mishandling, his dishonesty, his incompetence as a manager. Hopefully it's becoming clear to everybody that this president isn't up to the job, but not quite as clear from the Fox News Sunday news summary, because they're trying to hide it from you, I say. But now I have 5 newsmaker clips I'm going to show you. 2 Anthony Fauci's, a Steve Mnuchin, a Larry Kudlow, and a Steve Mnuchin. So I have 2 clips here of Anthony Fauci. He is the the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. I think that's the NIAID. And so he knows a lot about infectious diseases, and he, I think, wants us to do more than we're doing in terms of quarantining ourselves, shutting things down. There've been, even with all the anxiety about the coronavirus, there's still been a lot of people like going out, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, especially young people, and that's what Chuck Todd asked Anthony Fauci about. And then when he talks about wanting to do more and how it's better to overreact than underreact, Chuck Todd actually comes up with a good follow-up question, which I know a lot of you think is unusual for Chuck Todd, where he says, well, are you telling people in the administration about that? And you can see his answer after we watch that clip together over here.
Italy, you've brought up Italy a few times. I want to bring up a story here in the Boston Globe where one Italian journalist shared the following remark, and it just said, many of us were too selfish to follow suggestions to change our behavior. Now we're in lockdown and people are needlessly dying. This is St. Patty's Day weekend. There's been plenty of bars and restaurants that are crowded. Is this a mistake? France just shut it down. Spain is shutting it down. I think Pennsylvania's thinking about doing this. Should the country shut down bars and restaurants?
Well, that's an individual question. What the country should do is absolutely, and more so proportionately, in those areas that have community spread. But as a country...
Well, what areas don't have community spread right now, Dr. Fauci?
I mean real obvious community spread. So the question is that you want to bring down and hunker down everywhere, even more so. I'm not saying the rest of the country's okay, don't worry about it. Everybody's got to get involved in distancing themselves socially. If you are in an area where there's clear community spread, you have to be much, much more intense about how you do that. That's where you get things like school closings. You don't want to close every school in the country, but there are areas.
Why don't you? And I ask this because do you worry that if some places do a lockdown, but some don't? I think Indiana is one of every state that touches Indiana has closed schools, but Indiana hasn't, for instance. So are you risking something if not everybody is following the same guidelines?
No, Chuck, you always want to be ahead of the curve. I mean, the golden rule that I say is that when you think you're doing too much, you're probably doing enough or not enough.
Okay.
All right, that's the thing you've got to do. You don't want to be complacent. You always want to be ahead of the curve. But it depends on how far ahead of the curve you want to be. Don't even for a second think that I'm saying we shouldn't. I like to be criticized when I say, oh, you're being too overreactive. That's good for me, right?
Let me ask it this way. We've had a healthcare official say this to us, that if we could guarantee that people would get their sick leave pay, guarantee that we could basically do what FEMA does in a natural disaster, give people cash for the basics, for groceries. And would you prefer a 14-day just sort of national shutdown to slow this down?
I would prefer as much as we possibly could. I think we should really be overly aggressive and get criticized for overreacting.
Okay, have you made this point of view known inside the administration?
Yes.
Is it getting pushback, or are they slowly getting there?
In fairness, they listen and they generally go with what we say.
So should we expect more closures? Should more Americans be prepared to be hunkering down at their house?
I think Americans should be prepared that they're going to have to hunker down significantly more than we as a country are doing.
That means no restaurants, no bars, things like that?
Chuck, when you say no...
Yeah, I hear you say no. Unlikely.
Much more so. I mean, obviously, you're going to have people who are going to go to restaurants anyway, but for the most part, and particularly, if I can say this is particularly appropriate and relevant for people at the higher risk. The elderly and those who have underlying conditions right now should really hunker down.
The final thing I want to ask you about is our hospital.
So there's Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that he tries to tell them at the White House that they have to do the maximum amount, and they should try to be looking to overreact rather than underreact. And usually they listen to him, but I kind of wonder about this travel ban. I've seen Dr. Anthony Fauci say that it is good to stop people with the virus from coming into your community or coming into the country, that is, in addition to mitigation, that does help with the containment. But the way that this travel ban from Europe was instituted, well, first with misinformation as to what the exemptions would be, but then which scared a lot of Americans into all coming home at the same time and put them. You saw the pictures in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary where people were in the airports coming back from Europe. I think there are like 12 or 13 U.S. airports that they came into, and they had to stand in these big, like, shoulder-to-shoulder lines for 4 hours, 6 hours, waiting to take some questionnaire and have their temperature taken. And here you can see CNN's Brianna Keilar ask Anthony Fauci about whether that's a good idea over here.
Even the young.
You said lessening of social interaction. Well, let's take a look at these pictures, actually, of Americans trying to get back into the country from Europe last night. I mean, we've seen these images at a number of airports, crowded lines for health screenings. What is your first thought when you see that?
That unfortunate that that's not what we like to see, but human nature is human nature. People should realize if you are an American citizen, if you are a permanent resident, if you are a relative, you can get back into the country. You don't need to get back right now. You can pace getting back. But we're all humans. We all are afraid. I mean, and it's understandable. I'm not criticizing it. Somehow we need to mitigate that, because putting people in crowds like that is not helpful.
Should they be spaced? Should officials be spacing them better in these situations?
If you can possibly, I mean, I'm not going to make policy here with you, but if you can possibly lessen that crowding one way or the other, we should do it.
So I want to ask you about testing.
I wish he would make policy. I wish someone would make policy, or at least a good policy, because there was no good policy in terms of how to deal with those people coming back from Europe. It was ridiculous. There's so many steps that this administration has taken that has actually made things worse. And that's only what we know about. So I find that all pretty disturbing. And then I was talking about the misinformation in the Oval Office address. This is the next clip I want to show you is actually Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, one of the couple people from the Trump administration who was willing to come out on the Sunday shows. Also Larry Kudlow, you'll see in just a minute, from CBS. But Steve Mnuchin pretended that Donald Trump didn't say anything that was wrong or misinformation in that Wednesday Oval Office speech. You'll see here that Jonathan Karl points out all three of the mistakes. That he said that they were going to be banning cargo, which is one of the reasons, from Europe, which is one of the reasons the stock market dropped so badly. He said that there was going to be a ban on travel from Europe. He said that well, you'll see all three of the pieces of misinformation are put. And then the one that Steve Mnuchin won't admit is that he said cargo, that they would stop cargo, and he's blaming the people who heard what he said, even though that's what he said. You can go back and watch it yourself, and I will talk about that a little more after we watch that Steve Mnuchin clip answering Jonathan Karl over here.
He reacted very well to.
The market, and not just the market, also reacted severely negatively to the Oval Office address. Can you help me understand what happened there? I mean, the president said several things. He said that cargo would be banned coming in from Europe. He said he failed to mention that American citizens would not be subject to the ban. He said that insurance companies were going to cover all costs associated to treatment of the coronavirus. These were all false statements. How in an Oval Office address, do statements about the president's own proposals end up being wrong?
Well, let me just first comment on your reaction to the stock market, because the stock market is going to go up, it's going to go down. We can't focus on every day the move. As it relates to the Oval Office address, the president was very clear. He wanted to address a very important point, which was he made the move to shut down travel so that we shut down more cases coming in. He wanted to reassure the American public. I don't think in an Oval Office address you can address every single issue as you're discussing. And I think, we saw...
But how does he get things wrong about his own proposal?
I don't think he got things wrong at all.
I mean, cargo's not banned.
And we were very clear that people misinterpreted the comment on cargo, and we immediately put out a statement to clarify that. So the president said this is similar to China. In China, cargo is not banned.
What caused this turn in the president?
People misinterpreted what the president said. No, the president, I think he misspoke. I think he read it wrong. He was supposed to say that cargo was going to be okay, was one of the exemptions, or would be exempt from the travel ban, but that is not what he said. He said that they would be stopping all of the cargo from Europe, and it's pretty sad that Steve Mnuchin wouldn't admit it under questioning from Jonathan Karl, and didn't even talk about the other pieces of misinformation that were in that Oval Office speech. I mean, that is like one of the main jobs of the president, is to give those set teleprompter speeches that calms the nation, gives out good information, and tells, the country, we're going to be all right, we're going to get through this, and these are the facts. And Trump failed miserably on Wednesday doing that. Why he is so bad at being president, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. This next clip I want to show you, like I said, is the other Trump administration official who came out onto the Sunday morning news analysis shows. This is Larry Kudlow. He is the, I believe he's director of the National Economic Council. So he's like one of Trump's top economic advisors. And Margaret Brennan never asks him about what he said a few weeks ago, where he gave out one of the worst pieces of misinformation on the coronavirus, where he said that, we have it contained, almost airtight, not airtight, but almost airtight. And of course, Margaret Brennan doesn't ask about that, but does ask about something that hasn't gotten a lot of emphasis. This bill that the House has passed, that the Senate is hopefully going to pass soon, that gives the paid family leave. It doesn't apply to businesses with employees under 50 employees, and also doesn't apply to businesses with over 500. So you have to be in that 50 to 500 sweet spot, which makes no sense. And at least she asks him about that and points it out, but doesn't really bring out the fact that it doesn't make sense, and lets him get away with saying, oh, well, the big companies are going to do what's right, and if there are any problems, that's when we'll change it. In the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Some big corporations already have paid leave policies,
yes,
but this bill doesn't apply to
small, medium business. That's what this is really.
If you have 500 employees and above, you're not impacted by this bill. Why? How do you guarantee that the people who fall into these categories will still be able to take leave, go home, and put food on their table and afford to do what the government's telling them to do?
Fall into which categories, Margaret? The lower category?
Well, if you're 50 employees or less, you can have a hardship exemption.
That's
if you're
correct.
500 or more employees,
You qualify for you. If you're 500
if you're in that middle
or
range,
less,
you're
you
impacted.
qualify.
If you're above that, you're not
and
required.
that includes self-employed people also. It's very important. Well, look, the last word on that, we don't know yet. I mean, if larger companies get into trouble, we will be looking at the possibilities using the full powers of the federal government, which are quite substantial during an emergency declaration like this. We will be looked to helping any individuals who might get left behind or might have a danger of getting left behind. In this bill, free testing, I think, is a very big thing. And I also think the food stamp additions, particularly if kids have to come home because the schools are closed down. So we have lots of ways and means to make sure nobody falls through the cracks.
The president's speaking to grocers today, I saw on the schedule.
Okay, so yeah, Larry Kudlow wasn't asked the toughest question, and the follow-up wasn't all that great as to why they're leaving out the employees of the companies that have under 50 and over 500, especially the over 500. Why there's no mandate there makes no sense. And I mean, unless you like what Larry Kudlow said in his answer, which, they're good, and if anything's bad, we'll come back and help those people. That doesn't seem like the right answer to me, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm getting to my last news clip, my last clip of the night, as I try to make it through this whole live stream without sweating profusely or throwing up. And this last clip, actually, I talked earlier about whether this is going to be the thing that finally gets Trump. His dishonesty and his mismanagement of this particular crisis is something that people are going to hold him accountable for. And, even with people dying, I'm not sure that alone would cause some of the Republicans who support him to change their mind about Trump. But the one thing that might get him is the economic effects of this health crisis. The possibility that we are already starting a recession, and that's what this next clip is about. It's Steve Mnuchin talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday about whether we're in a recession. Now, the thing about a recession, for those who don't know, a recession is when there are 2 quarters in a row with negative growth, with decrease in economic activity. The GDP goes down instead of up for 2 quarters in a row, but you don't know what the GDP did during a quarter till like a month or so after the quarter, and even then it can be changed after that. So we're coming at the end of the first quarter here, probably not enough of an effect in January through March to cause negative growth. So if we are going to have a recession, it would be in the second and third quarter, and by the time we really find out about it for sure, will be after the election. But that's just the technical label recession. People know that we're in a recession long before that technical label comes out. And when business activity goes down, people lose their jobs, the people's 401ks crash, and those are the things that hopefully, even amongst some of Trump's Republican supporters, will finally get people to see Trump for the dishonest, bumbling manager that he is, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final clip for the night together over here.
Great to be with you.
A growing number of financial experts say now that the U.S. and the world are headed into a recession this year. And they talk about an expanding hit both on the demand side and the supply side. Are they right?
Well, Chris, what I would say is I wouldn't focus on the technical issue of whether we're going to be in a recession or not. What I'd focus on is, one, what do we need to do right now? Because it's clear we need to get economic relief to the economy. And two, where are we going to be later this year? If the medical professionals are correct and we're doing all the things, I expect we'll have a big rebound later in the year. So this isn't like the financial crisis, as I've said. This will have an end to it as we confront the virus.
I'm going to press a little bit on this and then we'll move on, but you've got disruptions to the global supply chain, and even more important, you've got consumers who have been the main drivers of this economy, and their consumer spending is grinding to a halt. I understand, as the Secretary of the Treasury, you don't want to predict a recession, but it could happen.
Chris, what I'd focus on is that we need to get economic relief to the people that are impacted by this. And as I've kind of described this, we're in the second inning. The first inning was the $8 billion. The second inning, we passed bipartisan legislation to make sure that workers that need to be home in small and medium-sized businesses will get paid. We are now going back to Congress and focusing this week on the airlines industry, the hotel industry, the cruise ship. There's no question that the travel industry has been impacted like we've never seen before. The president is absolutely determined that we will use whatever tools we have, and whatever tools we need, we will go to Congress and get. And there's a lot of bipartisan support.
That's an important message, and we're going to get into that in detail. But, people are living in the here and now, and I have to ask you, people are looking at their 401ks. We look at that number in the corner of the screen, and the Dow Jones dropping. According to one estimate, the market has lost almost $8 trillion in value from its record high, which was just a month ago. How much further are the markets going to drop?
You know, I've always been one to say I can't predict where the market is today, this week. What I can tell you is people who bought stocks after the crash in '87, people who bought stocks after the financial crisis did really well. So in terms of long-term investors, I have every confidence that this market is going to be higher down the road, and the U.S. is still the greatest place to invest.
But you talk about, you know, who bought after the crash. When is after the crash?
Chris, we can never predict the bottom of the market or the top of the market, and that's why investors need to focus on the long term. But again, let me go back and say, there's no question. There are businesses that will be severely impacted. We are focused on helping those businesses that need liquidity. There's some businesses that are booming. I mean, you look at the stores and people who are buying certain consumer products. What we've seen from the credit card data is travel is down extraordinary. Almost corresponding is an increase in purchases of food, pharmacy good, and supplies. And again, what we're focused on, and the president wants us to look at a big stimulus program because we need to help American workers now.
Let's talk. You'll be happy to.
Of course, he talked about the big rebound, Steve Mnuchin, in that clip. But if people are hoarding, like buying more supplies than they need, then actually some of those purchases they'll be like a letdown, where people won't need to purchase those things that they hoarded during this crisis. So that kind of contradicts some of what Steve Mnuchin was saying there. But I kind of like Chris Wallace's follow-up there, like, you know, you're talking about buying after the crash. When is after the crash? And that's pretty much what we're all wondering. When is the crash finally going to be at? When are we going to get to the bottom or the top of the top of the pandemic, the top of the spread of the virus? Is it going to be in a few weeks? Is it going to be in a few months? Somewhere in between? Hopefully we'll have better news next week, but I don't think we're going to really have better news for at least a few weeks. But I will keep covering the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I'm sorry I kind of rushed through this one. I'm actually starting to feel a little sicker now, and because I did the early show and it's been such a crazy day, I don't have a Dash and Sandy clip for you all tonight. I apologize for that, but Dash and Sandy will be back next week. I will be back next week, hopefully feeling better, with more answers for you about these questions that nobody seems to answer as to where we're going with this coronavirus crisis. But anyway, I hope you appreciate that I still spent like 7 or 8 hours today working on this show. And I also appreciate my Super Chat contributors, Tom Trask and Shares Gallagher and G Wolf 333. And I see Netherlands is on partial lockdown. So, and I appreciate the get well soon message. That's the program I have for you all tonight. I may have something to show you during the week this week. Otherwise, I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you